is a spring setting. There's more people online today than in the room. We do turn on the microphones these days so that you have to press the black in the front of it, and the light will come on in the front, and then the light will come on when you press that, and you have to hold it on while you're speaking. The camera will turn towards you. It's great. We get to find out what you're asking. The talk will go until about 20:25 after 2, at which time we invite you to come out and meet the speaker with a little bit of soda and cookies, have more discussion. And during the year when we're having classes, we have this as our distinguished speaker series. And what's kind of exciting today is we have a perspective of the marriage that I think is really crucial today of art and science. I think that we've discovered, Apple and a lot of other examples, that technology by itself doesn't work with people. And so Annie here runs a research program or 2 or 3, I don't know, in France, and she has lots of experience working between companies and being a sociologist by training, or maybe I've misspoke. She comes in with a different perspective. So today she's going to tell us about a perspective that I think that the technologists have to be thinking about more and more. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted. Can you hear me all right? Okay, thank you. So my name is Annie Gentes. I'm a professor in Information and Communication Sciences in School of Engineering. My School of Engineering is specialized in telecommunication, which means that we have computer science, electronics, communications, networks, and social science and economics department. Within this department, I created the Codesign and Media Lab because I was interested in how people actually invent and design these information technologies. And that's part of my talk is about the way that I work with engineering departments or engineering labs to actually design these new media. I just want to say something about the different pictures, photos, or artworks that you're going to see. Most of them are from artists, new media artists that I've been working with. Not all of them, and a number of the pictures as well are from our own experiments in a number of fields. I've actually been working with researches in working on virtual intelligent agents, on ad hoc Wi-Fi, on a different number of technologies. And I am not going to describe all these examples, but it's just to give you some background about the way I work in this particular school and with other industrial or public research labs. This is the demonstration outline of my talk. Bear with me if you and I agree that information technologies are not only tools to act on the world, but are also media, that is to say, technologies that help us represent the world, that help us think about the world, then inventing and designing them require special skills. And I think that everybody here in this room and online is concerned about that. Be it, as I said, open software or ad hoc Wi-Fi, ad hoc networks, or any kind of information technologies. We are all concerned not only by the fact that we are acting on the world, but because we have a responsibility on the way we are going to talk about the world, our relationship to it, and the way we interact with each other. So if this is true, then we also need a more complex definition of users. Because of course, if people are not only using things, but actually interpreting things, they are readers, they are spectators, and they are citizens. And I'll come back to that later, because I think that the political responsibility in IT research is fundamental. And finally, we also need to reformulate or to rethink their implication, let's say the users in general, even though we are going to discuss this word. We need to think about their implication in the design process, because again, if it's not only to use, but it's also to represent and to think about or to step back. Well, of course, the way you have users interact with these objects is slightly different than using a car. My point with these two pictures, the Las Meninas and a wheel, is that it is kind of different to paint or to build a wheel. I'm not saying that there are not skills in both endeavors, but the skills are kind of different. And you know, I'll go on along my talk about these differences. My presentation is organized as follows. I'm a hybrid researcher. You'll see that later. So I'll say a few words about me. I'm a hybrid researcher who happens to be interested in hybrid objects. Functional, I mean, IT are functional objects, sure. There are cultural objects, political objects. And because they are all this, I think that we need to find a path to actually evaluate these technologies, to assess these technologies. And of course, there are different methods to do that. I mean, I'm not the first one to be able to, you know, okay, what do we do with this new mobile phone, or what do we do with this new website, or what do we do with this game? I'm not the first one. I won't be the last, thank God. But we developed in my lab a number of concepts and methods that I'd like to share with you. So, hybrid researcher. My background, the Lord of the Rings. Okay, I did an MA. I studied and I graduated in English and American literature. And I did my MA on Lord of the Rings. So my background is essentially humanities. I had history of art as well, sciences of art, applied arts. But I did my PhD in public communication. That is to say, my subject was how can the state, the nation, communicate? What are the strategies of political and public departments of state? How do they communicate? So it's a focus on strategies, actors, media, and of course narratives as well. I mean, the common point is that they have to tell stories, hopefully, not misleading stories. Of course, this PhD is about political, I mean, not only information and communication sciences, but also it's based on political science. And eventually, I did what we have in France, which is an habilitation à diriger des recherches. It's another kind of PhD stuff that we do to be tenured and to be full professor. And I did it on design and new media. Because one of the threads, you know, one of the common points between all these research were about creativity. How are you creating books, narratives? How are you creating political speech? How can you build a new strategy of communication? How do you relate to people through a number of media? And because I was working in the School of Engineering, I thought, you know what, I have to use all these different skills that I learned in different lives to apply to these new media and see how I can actually do something to help design and invent these technologies. So these technologies are hybrid, and of course, they are here for us to do things. So they are focused on tasks. And I am not going to really develop on that because there are people here who know a lot better than me, you know, how you use a technology, how do you test the technology with testers and users and stuff. I would like just to emphasize the fact that the first thing that these technologies help you do is read and write. I mean, you actually read something. You read texts, images, you interpret what are the signs on the screen. These reading and writing activities help you to then support intellectual activities like to copy, to paste, to communicate, to create hyperlinks and whatnot. And of course, all these intellectual activities help you access other activities such as to buy something, to book a ticket, whatever, start a program, or to suffer. And here's an example from a friend of mine, which is Sadomaso Wi-Fi, Christophe Bruno, but there have been a number of artists who've worked on the fact that each time people would type on Google a word like pain, well, this performer would have its little sticker and would actually feel some pain in his or her arm. I am not going to comment on that. Okay, hybrid objects. They are cultural products. Okay, you know what? It is good news and bad news. Good news is that because all these social networks, all these IDs are cultural products. They shape the way we imagine our lives, we represent our lives, we represent our relationships together. So they're a huge part in our common shared vision of what it means to be human, what it means to be together, how we have hopes, what are our values you like, but you do not like. Okay, so these are models of society that are embedded into all these systems, but the bummer is, well, Harry Potter sold 400 million copies. And you know what? We don't know why. I do what I always do, right? I mean, you've been taught to do literature, so what do you do in literature? Well, that's easy. You go and analyze the book, see if it's worth anything, what is the style, what is the, I mean, is there any novelty? Is it really creative in terms of characters, stories, or whatnot? And you know what? It is not. Harry Potter is not. I've checked with other literary critics, and they say, wow, that's a good book, that's a good product, but it's not exceptional. So why 400 million copies? So the answer is, there are tricks, but they are not rules. I mean, you cannot guarantee the success of a cultural product. And truth is, well, we have, and I'm just at the beginning of this, we have to take the full measure of this, because if Facebook is just as Harry Potter, something not bad, but not that exceptional either, so why does it make it, I mean, why do they share the same literary destiny? Why do they at some point are so famous, useful, etc.? You can always say that, of course, the merit is theirs, right? I mean, they invented a number of things. They just, they exist. I mean, there were some efforts. But truth is, there is no rules. As people who invent new technologies all the time, and who might, from time to time, complain about the fact that we are not recognized in what we do because our products do not meet fame, I'd say, don't worry, look at Harry Potter. Anyways. There are also political objects. And again, I think this is very important to stress. It's these tools, these media, they support new voices, new actors, new styles. And again, we have a responsibility when we design them to see what kind of political model they offer. And again, knowing here a number of people involved in open software, for instance, or voting technologies, or ad hoc networks, there is a model of a political nature within all these technologies. And that's very important to be aware of that. And I put two books here. Serge Chacotin, who is not very well famous, but who actually is the first, he was German, this is a French translation. He was the first guy who actually wrote in the 1930s, a treatise on how to influence crowds. And he happened to be in another political party who was against the Nazis. His political party prevented him to use these techniques. He did nonetheless in a number of areas of Germany. Where he did, the success of the Nazi Party was really, I mean, the votes just dropped. I mean, he was able to counter partly the Nazi Party in Germany in the 30s. And where he couldn't use these techniques, the Nazi Party was like overwhelming. And his book was destroyed very shortly after that. It had been translated into French, and all the books were taken from libraries in 1940 in France and burned. So I think that the question of how do you actually today think of communication tools and communication empowerment of people is again what is the reason why we are here together, right? We may be building cars, but honestly, my interest is not in driving. My interest is in how do we share a responsibility to build this public sphere. And of course, all the later theoreticians about the public sphere, starting with Habermas and a number of other people, they've stressed repeatedly the impact of media to structure a political debate, a political debate is something very simple. It's when people gather together to decide on how they are going to organize their lives together. So it's either that or you shoot. It's a choice. To go, yeah, sure.
I have done a cross-disciplinary study recently of fashion. The fashion, because it's a very personal expression. It's the messaging. To me, it's been mind-bending and mind-opening to look at. I see you're using art here, but that's a personal expression of art. That is the political culture.
Absolutely.
That's going on in fashion. It's a weird thing for you to be studying. People, why are you studying that? But I'm interested in it because of what you mentioned earlier about.
Sure. Well, you know, there's this amazing, I was just talking about it with Ted this morning, at the De Young in San Francisco. There's the exhibition of Jean-Paul Gaultier. It's just an amazing exhibition. But I think it's really because he is an artist and he kind of takes, you know, urban cultures, movie cultures, and he thinks about what it means to be between genders, between, you know, no longer a body of its own, but like a body with a number of artifacts and stuff and enhancement. And it's an amazing exhibition. Speaking of fashion, I really recommend this exhibition in the De Young. Yes.
Are you going to cover your own Minitel system out of curiosity?
Am I going to explain the Minitel? I could, but later. No, it isn't planned here. But it was definitely, yeah, it was.
Yeah, it's very advanced. I mean, most Americans have no concept of how far thinking you guys were in the late 70s and why you were motivated to do that for the simple thing of not wanting to print telephone directories.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's a very good question. If I have time later, we can kind of go back to your question, if you don't mind. Okay, thank you for pointing this out. This slide, just to kind of sum up the situation so far, these are 3 images. The Magritte painting, this is not a pipe, which is also called the Treachery of Images. And then you got the Kossuth, so this is 1928-29, this is 1965, and this is Rich Gold paper, founding paper of ubiquitous computing, which is called This Is Not a Pipe. And what I find really interesting, because I mean always, you know, when people speak about ubiquitous computing, they are quoting Weiser, Mark Weiser, right? And I don't. I quote him. Why? Because this guy who came from the toy industry, like tangible objects, who obviously had a culture of what it means to have like tangible objects, and then you play with them, and you give them a second life, etc., etc. He pointed out that suddenly every object could have like a second life. Okay, if this table is a table, that's fine, but it can become a media because it is some weapon in some kind of game, or it is some meeting table in a virtual world. So suddenly this tangible object becomes something totally different, which is a media. That is to say, there is a message. It is, but we cannot see it. So how can we actually, and some of the papers from, I mean, like the 2nd or 3rd paper by these guys who were thinking back then, you know, about ubiquitous computing was, oh, you know what, that's really annoying because people would like to know when it starts and when it stops. That is to say, they need to know where the document is. I mean, if every object can be transformed into a ruse, as you know, Rich Gold said, that's really complicated because we are in between media, but we don't know it, and tangible objects, but they are no longer tangible objects. How do we make sense of it all? So I think that it is really my question today. It is when you switch from the artifact itself to a representation of this artifact, there is a dramatic change, and you need to have that in mind if you want to assess these technologies. That is to say, how do they help us represent things or think about things? So if we go back to design, I will totally agree with you that there are so many common points between designing a chair and designing IT, of course. Techniques, materials, legal issues, marketing issues, costs, aesthetics, social status, and whatnot, of course. But then, and that is a little bit more different, again, these technologies shape the way we express ourselves, we communicate, which is largely the difference. And then you have to think, and that's, she's a historian of writing, And she pointed out that the invention of writing is first the invention of the notion of document. That is to say, when you've got this priest which shows in the sky a number of stars, and who says, you know what, I am drawing this, and this assemblage of stars is a text. The first thing this guy does is to actually say, amongst all the signs that surround us, there is one part of it which is a screen with the larger meaning of the word. And because this is a screen, I understand there is some message in it. So I can actually cut from reality a number of places. And of course, these places have become very specialized. You know, you got your notebook, you got your computer, you got another notebook, you got a book. So now we've got special places for these places, special media where we can actually say we are no longer, you know, trying to dig a hole or hammer a nail or whatever. We are thinking about it. We are writing stuff to just step back and think about it. And so the desire of text, that is to say, even though you have like, like scattered letters, suddenly what you want to do, and most of modern art and contemporary art is about, like all these signs, and suddenly what you want to make is a text of it. You want to see a message. And so our capacity is to see and to try to make sense of a diversity of signs. So again, what I think is, for me, what is very important is that we consider these technologies are reflexive, because they either, linguistic or iconic signs, no matter, or sounds or whatever, they organize our representation of knowledge. Okay, so if we keep in mind all these different elements, how do we include users in the process of invention? Because that was the topic, right? First, I'm doing my French thing, right? Okay, I don't want to use the word user. Okay, so is user the right concept for media? Because you know what? We have other words for that. Audience, spectator, reader, citizen. More to the point, is there a user in invention? User, sorry to be again the French girl in the room, but doing Latin is kind of compulsory in France, well, at my time anyways. And user comes from usus, utor, which means used. Like, you've been doing that so many times before. So if it's used, it's not an invention. It was already there. So how do you have a user for something that doesn't exist? Eventually, admittedly, say we have a user, or say that we have users who might be interested in something that doesn't exist yet. Okay, how do we involve the user? And when do we involve the user? And supposedly, why do we involve the user? I will start with this last question. It's a very ancient question. Aristotle, for a start, pointed out that there are a number of activities in design. Poiesis is what you do when you invent stuff, from Latin to Greek. I have to be alien. Okay, so poiesis is really about creation. You create, it's the activity which is directed to the production of something. Praxis is really the way of acting. It's experiencing. It is really to be in the act of doing something. And what Aristotle points out is that it is our being human. If you don't act, you're dead, obviously. So if you're no longer alive, you cannot act. So you're kind of not exploring the potential of your being, because praxis is really that exploring the potential of being, that is through action, activity, and stuff. But he says something very important. He says you have to be careful about that. And that's where phronesis comes into play. That is to say, activity, and in particular this activity which is devoted to the invention of new stuff, has to be accompanied by a reflection about, is there some danger? Is there some danger for myself as an inventor? Is there a danger for my community? Is there a danger for society? And this debate, of course, is, I like to quote Findley, who is this professor in Canada, who has been writing about ethics and design a lot, especially because he's interested in the teaching of design. So he thinks that as professors or as teachers, we have to think, what are the rules? I mean, what do we have in mind? And Huyghe, who is a French philosopher who writes also about design, fortunately, I don't think that he's been translated. One of the best books, and I like this picture because this is Urspec, is The Risk Society, because what he says is today, well, mostly what we invent, we just don't control anymore. So it's a big, wicked design issue. So the question is today, okay, so what do we do if what we invent is just out of control? And of course, he's more thinking in terms of ecology, we've seen all the different terrible dramas in Japan and a number of places. And so the question is, how do we design now that we have all these threats and that we seem to be out of, all this seems to be out of control. Another thing that I'd like to point out, so this is an old debate, and it has taken a new dimension with the fact that these inventions are mostly, some of them are out of control. But another guy and a number of people say, user is a good thing. To involve the user is a good thing. We should wonder why we do it. And is it not a way to avoid thinking about the creativity of an author? And the point is, not maybe everybody can invent or create. It's not to say that people don't have creative skills. It's just to mean that people need to be probably educated or helped to do it, or there's some way that we can, not everybody is Zola or Hemingway or Proust or, they happen to be very good writers and bad writers. That's it. And so how do we organize not only, the user-centric design, but also think again about the notion of authorship in design. Of course, there have been a number of traditions, and I'm just wondering what time it is. Okay. So there are different traditions in the way IT or design or invention has been experimenting with users, let's say. I'll point just a few of them, and only qualitative methods. First, primarily qualitative methods. First, the one which comes from clinical psychology. It's the story of we are all rats. Okay. So you take people and you experiment the technology you're interested in and see how people, use the buttons or not, understand what is at stake, how do they fare with the artifact. The focus is really on action. Again, you see that for me, there is a danger to compare this to a media. Because again, to use a hammer for a nail means that it is, physical, geometrical, ergonomical, but it's not necessarily symbolical. It's not at all symbolical. You can always say, well, it's a hammer, and so there is some symbolical meaning, but that's not what's going to make your action more efficient. So again, this is interesting, but it's focused on function, and more than anything else, all these experimentations happen in labs. So they were out of the situation where the technology would actually be used, mostly. I'm kind of making it simple and in larger, So what would escape the notice would be the institutions, the norms, the specific time and space that the technology would be used in. That was one of the first traditions. It was very useful. So usability is also about that. I give some definitions here. What for me is complicated is here, right? Usability guidelines change extremely slowly because they depend on human nature, which tends to change at a rather glacial pace. Right. If there is something that I kind of be mad about, is human nature. Since when human nature is reading on a computer, and in particular, reading on a computer from left to right. Oh, you know what? There are some people, they actually read from right to left or from top to bottom. So the point is, for me, I mean, they've been very useful. But again, you have to understand that if you limit that to nature, you're in trouble, because what you're not seeing is culture. And culture change extremely slowly. That's true. But again, it is cultural. So maybe there are some common elements in our humanity, probably, but not necessarily the fact that we read from left to right. And so that's an important, for me, limitation of usability techniques to involve the user. I want to say a few words about ergonomics as well. Again, the Greek is useful because it's about ergon, work, and nomos, science. What happens with ergonomics is that their focus, and in particular in France, were about people at work, and to make sure that the machine, the environment, the temperature, the light, was not harming people. So the question was really at the beginning very physical, and everybody's seen this kind of stuff, right? I mean, how do we never type or use our computers without hurting ourselves? I mean, honestly, I discovered a number of things. You know, bent knee cuts off circulation to leg. Honestly, I didn't know that. Right. Anyways, so that's very useful. That's absolutely necessary, you know, in work environment again, but not necessary only in work environment. And ergonomic people, people in ergonomy have broadened the scope to, you know, emotions and a number of things. But they actually analyze the place where you work and how your body is constrained by the technology, harnessed by the technology to do stuff that are detrimental to your health, which is, I think, very useful. Later, because the problem with all these way of including the user were limited by the lab situation, or limited in scope, that is to say, okay, what is your physical response to a certain environment? People from ethnography were hired massively in the 90s to help with information and communication technology design, ethnomethodology as well, and conversational analysis. So basically, what was the outcome of this was that suddenly you understand that everything you do has meaning because of its context. Even reading is different based on the different context where you are reading. So there are a number, well, I'll go back to that. I mean, I have some reference for you. But so the idea is that you need to be really in the wild. So it was a switch from the lab to the wild to be able to have the whole layers, the many layers of meaning that are related to the specific time, place, whatever, of your use of a technology. So ethnographers were used repeatedly to assess how people would, in the long run, and long run was like a difficult question, but they managed to do that for a number of experiments. They managed to have this kind of insight into people's practice. And I quote Clifford Geertz because I really think that he is from the new ethnographical school that is really focusing on how do you write together, how do ethnographers write with people their own story. That is to say, the ethnographer is not this all-knowing guy who can interpret your life without your help. This, for him, and you know, a lot, I mean, the new school of ethnographers was the lie, so to speak, because people write their stories with you. And so there is the translator who does it, there is the guide who does it, there is the ethnographer, and so they've got this multiple, and people who are interviewed. So how do you actually put up a coherent narrative out of all this input from different people? And I think that his work was really interesting. So, except from the lab thing that I never used, I am mostly an ethnographer by practice, but of course what I was interested in again was to find new ways of assessing these technologies. And I did two things. I thought that semiotics would make sense, again, because if people understand what they have, it's because they interpret what they have. And how do they interpret? And how can we tap into this literacy to actually develop the technology, make it more meaningful, assess it, not only in terms of activities, but in terms of how does it make sense. So for me, it was very important to be able to help design these technologies based on literacies. How do people make sense? The other thing that we finally got to was elaborating on ethnography. There are a number of very interesting things in ethnography, and one of the things when you read ethnographic books, you think that it is kind of strange because people tell you, oh, I've been in the field, I've interviewed all these people, etc., etc., and then I talk to you and I kind of bring to you the gist of, you know, these people's lives, right? But what happens is that they don't talk to us readers directly. I mean, they first talk to their colleagues. I mean, there is some stage, you know, in between when they go out of the field, talk to their colleagues, present their stuff, and then eventually elaborate a new discourse based on these different interactions within the field and without the field. And so this led me to the notion of perlaboration that I'm going to talk about, because it's kind of this not very well defined area of ethnography, and also the idea of performance. And this idea of performance for me is based on artistic performance, in the sense of what happens during an artistic performance. And I think that when people are placed in a situation where they know that they are going to contribute to the technology, they actually perform the technology. And I need to go back to this definition. And again, going through performances in art has helped me try to understand what was going on and definitely promote this kind of understanding and practice. To do that, I've been involved, like in the last 6 years, with 12 French and European public research projects in ICT in a very large diversity of fields. I can tell you, I chose, because again, to make you travel a little bit, 3 projects that I've been working on with the Museum of Arts and Crafts in Paris, which is a museum that was creating at the French Revolution, to protect the inventions of the past centuries against the terror. And so they built this museum. It was an abbé who decided to keep all the technologies that have been invented so far. And this is a very interesting museum because, of course, they are directly related to another university which studies technologies. And so there was like this experiment that we did with them. This is the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris as well, which is close to the Louvre Museum. It's the same building. So it's different. It's about a patrimonial. The two are patrimonial museums. They are not science museum in the sense of you don't practice, as you do here, with the Science Museum in San Francisco, for instance, which is a different type of museum. And we worked on a major Monet exhibition a year and a half ago, with La Galerie du Grand Palais. No way to translate that. Okay, so what the lab did was first to explain to you how we got to this conclusion and try to figure what were the best methods. Was first ethnology, that is to say observation of how engineering research projects worked. After all, I am not an engineer. I don't know what it means to be doing engineering research. So the first thing is, you sit, you say, guys, I'm here to help. Just tell me what you want me to do. And that's exactly what I did. And so I followed these research groups. And what is interesting in this position is that people give you a certain status and give you roles and give you things and stuff to do. And you learn a lot from what they ask you to do. You learn a lot about them, you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot of how can we actually mix our different expertise in an ICT research project. So that was very interesting. From this ethnographic background, I switched to grounded theory, which is more about comparing. So what happened was I started with only engineers research groups, but then I suggested, you know, I was looking at what they did, and I thought, you know, well, that's crazy, guys, but I think that there are people that you might feel helpful, and they are called designers. And you know what? There is this amazing school of design in Paris, which is called École nationale supérieure de création industrielle, industrial creation national school. And so probably we should work together. And so since then, we've included in all our research projects designers, either professional designers, design firms, or design students, or design researchers within these engineering technology-based projects. And what happens is that they both had the project, so they could keep like parallel schedules with, you know, their divergent methods and then converging onto, okay, so what are we inventing now? What are the stakes? How can we actually develop a demonstrator or a prototype out of our different visions of the project? And so that we did that, you know, for a number of cases. And eventually, I did a few case studies, particularly with Bell Labs and Microsoft in Cambridge, the Social Digital System Group, because I was just wondering if what I observed in, you know, all these European IT-based, either industrial or public research projects was like something that everybody did or not. I wasn't sure after all, right? I mean, I just couldn't know for sure. So that's why I did for 6 years on a number again of really different projects, you know, virtual intelligent agents. We did a lot about pervasive computing, pervasive games, ubiquitous computing, mesh networks, you name it. Also, more artistic projects like an interactive wall in the city of Marseille and Aix-en-Provence, where people would actually build up, you know, kind of meet against this huge wall, interactive wall, and kind of share and experiment a number of artistic or artistic pieces of services. So it's the Be Kind Rewind slide. I don't think that it is possible to be in a creative group without being creative. Even if you say nothing, you're always there and you change the thing. So I decided that I needed to be here, not to inform research, but definitely to support creativity. So in this respect, the idea was to consider the technology as a whole, with values and cultures embedded as soon as its conception. That is to say, there is no, I mean, for engineering researchers and everybody else concerned, again, there are a number of life ideas, I mean, political stances, and a number of things that really matter to them and that they are more or less embedding into their research. And of course, imagination and technical skills are both at work in the building of these new technologies. So how can we support this creativity in all its facets, and not only the technical one? Well, technical one, they don't need me, right, obviously, so, right. Again, a theoretician that I find very useful is that the technology is not given, right? I mean, it is building up slowly from cobbled together to a more coherent, fluid whole. And so the idea is that Simondon emphasized the idea of I don't know how to pronounce that, concretization, your pick, well, it's written there. And so that it goes from being parts and pieces of different things, you know, that you actually aggregate to each other and suddenly, but then it grows to be more, again, synthetic in the way it works together. So the point for me is that we definitely need to be, as you know, social and human scientists at the beginning of this concretization process. This is a long quotation, you don't need to take it, but it's just to show you that the project of Gilbert Simondon, and you can actually download the PDF of the first part of his book on the mode of existence of technical objects, is really stimulate awareness of the significance of technical objects. We should like to show that culture fails to take into account that in technical reality there is a human reality, and that it is fully to play its role. Culture must come to terms with technical entities as part of its body of knowledge and values. Recognition of the modes of existence of technical objects must be the result of philosophic consideration, what philosophy has to achieve, whatever, okay? So, yeah, the idea is the opposition established between the cultural and the technical and between man and machine is wrong and has no foundation. So it's basically the program of my lab, right? I mean, okay, so what is human in technologies and how can we promote the human within the technology? So two things, I did two things. To tap into semiotic skills, literacies, how do we make sense? To tap into people's imagination, narratives, anecdotes, expanding the meaning of things, again at the beginning of their invention. That's more of the paradigmatic axis, that is to say, if it's not exactly that, could it be this different, this or that, you know, associative axis, or expanding the utility of things. That is to say, okay, well, is it easier to click once or twice, or what kind of activity do you want before or after, or do you want to remove or to add to make it a very successful activity, basically. Again, the critical French stance. You know what? We are lucky that people still want to participate into assessing these research things. When I questioned other labs, they said, well, they do it for the money. I don't have any money, so people don't do it for the money when they do it for me. Well, you know what? People like to talk about themselves. Well, honestly, I mean, considering the time they spend with us, I don't think that it's only for the 15-minute of fame. I really think that following Joël Lemarec, that there is still a lot of goodwill towards research as such. So when you ask people to participate in a test or an evaluation of a technology, what happens is that they are really willing, nicely willing, very generous with their time to help you with it. And I think that is a very important point because it shows that there is maybe research, and the moment where we test these technologies is a space and a time where we can actually debate with people of the use, of the impact, of the necessity of these technologies. That's where we call it, you know, I mean, like a demonstrator would be a debatable object. That's what Dan and Rabi at Royal College of Art in London call critical design. That is to say, there are times and spaces where indeed people can be asked to contribute, but not only to make the technology more efficient, but really to debate about it. So that's a way to see it. You know, I mean, why should people participate? Well, because maybe in research, there is one point in research where you can actually say what you have to say. So if information technologies are media, how do we anticipate the way they are going to be interpreted? I have 5, let's say 6 more minutes. So, eh?
Unless you want to have some questions also.
Unless I want to, so which means that I should stop now and you. Okay, let's make it a debate. Who wants me to present this, or do you want to ask questions right now? Okay, I'm gone.
Although I will ask a question. What I really enjoyed about that last point you made is that at the end, all of these suggestions that people have made of why people do it are not nearly as exciting or profound as if they do it for spiritual reasons, which is what your last point was. And that's kind of amazing. I think that's really where people go. They go to some spiritual goal.
how do we anticipate the way they are going to be interpreted, these things, right? Just to show you that there are a number, and not to quote myself, but definitely to quote Shaw and Jonas about the design approach to designing IT, and Harris' integration with semiotics. The idea is, how do you use semiotics to improve on the design of IT? And when I say semiotics, it's not because of semiotics devoid of any people interpreting the science, but because people are interpreting the science from a number of assumptions, from a number of cultural backgrounds, from a number of expertise. Well, we need to actually work on the semiotics of things. I don't know if I'm going to really do... Well, we came up with this idea that contradictory semiotic analysis would be helpful. That is to say, there is a moment of convergence. That is to say, designers, what they do, they see, they look at what exists, what are the different platform. Or we worked for an e-learning platform, so we'd say, okay, what is around? What if it's going to be different? We still need to know what is around. But then it's diverging in media. That is to say, you do the same kind of semiotic comparison, but on a different, more abstract concept, which is the concept, and we chose the concept of empathy. Because one of the reasons people don't stick to online learning is because they feel they are not together, or there is a lack of diversity of viewpoints that you always have. That is to say, I can see what Jack is seeing through empathic, or my cognitive capacity to actually switch my point of view from where I am to where you are. So this quality has been, of course, taken care of in a diversity of media. So how can we analyze in a diversity of media how empathy is actually staged? Because again, it's not a face-to-face situation. There is a media, there is a screen, there are signs. So how do you stage the possibility to be at to share different viewpoints within an e-learning situation? And so the idea was to develop a control room. Control room in TV is where you have all the different TVs and cameras, and you can choose camera 1, camera 2, and switch from one viewpoint to another on the same scene. And so you can switch from bird eye view, three-quarter view, shot and reverse shot, etc., etc. And how do we implement that? And so we implemented that into the e-learning session so that people could actually see what the professor sees, see what the other sees. The issue being that it becomes like a playground. So the point is, how do you concentrate and at the same time provide this feeling of togetherness and the possibility of sharing a different viewpoint? Anyways. Again, a question that I asked earlier is, what do we do when? Again, I have to stress the fact that what I'm interested in is the birth of the technology, the moment of invention. And I think that what is interesting to first see is that we need people performing these technologies, really using them in the wild. But then when we speak of performance, it's not only using them, it's actually taking all the elements of the experiment as a sign for something. And I just move on to this one. Maybe you've heard about breaching experiment in ethnomethodology. The idea was that in ethnomethodology, what is fascinating is people study how we adjust to each other, and we make sense of situations all the time. So these are little tiny adjustments, sentences, body language, organization of rooms, etc., that help us just organize our lives together. But the problem is, it is so natural that people don't know how to explain it. I mean, you don't necessarily see it because it is so usual. I mean, it is so part of your life. So what happened is, at the beginning of ethnomethodology, they would challenge the situation. They would throw somebody who would totally change the situation. They would provoke an accident, right? They would provoke an accident and see how people then would say, yeah, well, I have to reconstruct the whole situation. I am going to, no, I mean, this doesn't work, and I'm going to tell you why. But because of the contrast between the accident and the usual life, they were able to assess what usual life was. So that's what they did. And then it was used, of course, by engineering designers, because the same thing, but of course, I mean, the point of view was you look at the situation, and what your interest is as an ethnomethodologist guy is, what is your usual life? That's the focus. It's social science. The focus is there. Designers and engineers took that and said, you know what? When they do this, they can also assess the technology itself. That is to say, how do you make sense of this technology that we threw into your everyday life and that you didn't know what to do with it? So they used it, the same word, bridging experiment, but with a slightly different focus in engineering. And again, what I think for me is even more to the point is using the word performance, because actually what we take into consideration is how the technology changed the meaning of the institution, and in particular in museum, it does change the way you consider the museum. It does change the way you consider the technology itself. Is it a cultural object, a cultural device? Is it useful for culture or not? It changed the way you consider the people who are going to use it or who are legitimate to use it. That is to say, are you ready to pay for a technology that is promoted by Orange, for instance, the French operator, or if it's in a museum, do you consider that it's a public service so you don't want to pay for it? And so there have been a number of experiments, but you really actually take everything into consideration and consider all the aesthetics, the semiotic elements of the experience through a performance. And lastly, the question of perlaboration. I like this very much, I have to tell you. For those who remember Freud, either that's the question of memory. Okay, you're a social scientist. You're interested in what people do with these technologies. How do they bring up their expertise? How do they not only do something with the thing, but also how do they actually tell what they've been doing? What do they say about what they've been doing with this technology? Because it's very important too. Freud says there are three relationships to memory. Either you repeat yourself, you're totally neurotic, so you're like doing something that hurts, you do it again, that hurts, you do it again, that hurts. Okay, and so you go to the shrink to get rid of these repetitions because it's memory, indeed. But it is not memory that is making you grow up, right? A second type of memory is remembrance. Remembrance Day, right? Okay, we remember that this happened. Does it change your life? Honestly, no. That's a bummer, right? Because if it's only remembrance, well, I remember that, you know, this happened and doesn't change anything, right? What is very important, what happens during the psychological therapy is that you do remember what happened to you. You do. But you do a Durcharbeitung. You work through the experience. That is to say, you remember this experience, you talk about it, and in the process of talking about it, you reconstruct the experience, you rebuild yourself, and you're not telling lies, but the whole experience makes sense in a different way, and then you are able not to be, again, in neurosis or just remembrance. Oh, I remember my mom did that. You're not there. So what happens when you question people, when you have certain kind of interviews with people, it's, you're not doing, I'm not a psychologist, right? I'm not going to, you know, tell you things about, you know, who you are, whatever. But I take the time with all my interviewees to sit and go through their lives, anecdotes, whatever they want to tell you, and how it is related to the technology, because we perlaborate the technology. So it is this kind of speech which I find really important, which is not about, you know, being, yeah, we're going to be so efficient, right? Okay, does it work? Yes, no. No, it's how do you make sense of this technology and how do you rebuild your past, your future, your present, your identity in regard to this technology. And that informs and gives us ideas about what the meaning of this invention is. And we take our time to do it. And that's the conclusion, Ted.
Thank you. We had one person from the audience, the online audience, that asks you the question of how do you distinguish, or do you distinguish the person that motivates an invention versus the person that uses an invention? I'm not sure exactly why that question was asked, but it was related to one of your slides.
I think, well, I think it's a very good question, actually, because it's, again, the question not only on the individual, but of the infrastructure, the framework. I mean, you have roles. I was given a role. So when we have people test our technologies, we really ask them about research as well. What does it mean for them to be there? How do they define their place in this experiment? What do they want to do within this experiment? So it's kind of an open, I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, right, again. But I think at the beginning of an invention, and when you want to absolutely develop, I mean, to really cover all possible meanings of this technology, the imagination, the narratives, you know, the social, whatever meaning of this technology, you really need to be so open-minded. You really need to have your ears, you know, wide open, and to make sure that people are going to use it, but of course, or not. But you need to have this time, you know, quiet time of, you know, checking with them what they mean by that. You know, it's just doing it quietly.
So I think maybe, just given the time, maybe we'll take the rest of the questions offline out in the hall, unless there's somebody with a burning need to put something on the record. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
The person that asked that question just
What?
left me a message. So
Okay, back.
Yeah, I was